History remembers the Beast King of the North as a monster who devoured royal brides, but the chronicles of House Arrington hide a terrifying truth. She was thrown to the wolves as a scarred, broken sacrifice, yet instead of tearing her apart, the realm's most feared predator fell to his knees. The kingdom of Ethelgard was a realm built on vanity, towering stone, and the blood of its enemies. Within the high walls of Iron Oak Keep, beauty was not just an attribute, it was a currency. And by the cruel standards of her family, Lady Scarlett Arrington was completely bankrupt. Scarlett was the eldest daughter of Lord Cedric Arrington, a powerful duke who controlled the northern marches, but she was not his pride. She was his shameful secret. When Scarlett was merely 7 years old, her carriage was ambushed near the borders of the northern wilds. While her mother perished in the snow, Scarlett survived, but not without a permanent reminder of the terror. A massive, jagged scar slashed down from her left temple, tearing through her cheek and ending at her collarbone. The kingdom's best physicians had stitched her together, but the wounds healed thick, white, and monstrous. It looked as though a massive beast had tried to rip her face from her skull. In a court where ladies were expected to be flawless porcelain dolls, Scarlett was a cracked, ugly thing. Her father, Lord Cedric, could hardly bear to look at her. He quickly remarried Lady Beatrice, a woman whose beauty was matched only by her profound cruelty. Beatrice gave Cedric a second daughter, Rosalind, who possessed hair like spun sunlight and skin as unblemished as fresh cream. Rosalind became the jewel of Iron Oak Keep, while Scarlett was relegated to the shadows, hidden away in the drafty eastern towers, wearing veils to hide her monstrous deformity from visiting lords. For years, Scarlett endured the relentless mockery. She learned to keep her head down, to absorb the venomous whispers of the servants and the outright insults of her stepmother. "Keep your veil drawn, Scarlett," Beatrice would sneer, sipping wine from a silver goblet as Scarlett scrubbed the hearth, a task given to her despite her noble blood. "We have the Duke of Oakhaven arriving, and I will not have his appetite ruined by the sight of your ruined flesh. You are a blight on this family." Rosalind, lounging on a velvet chaise, would chime in with a cruel giggle. "Honestly, sister, you should be grateful Mother allows you in the main hall at all. If I looked like you, I would have thrown myself from the parapets long ago." Scarlett never fought back. She had internalized their hatred so deeply that she believed them. She believed she was unlovable, a cursed creature destined to die alone in the cold stone of her father's castle. But a dark shadow was creeping over Ethelgard, one that would soon drag Scarlett out of the shadows and into the bloody light of history. For decades, Ethelgard had been at war with the Vargfjell, the untamed northern territories ruled by Rowan, the Lichen King. The humans called him the Beast King. Tales of his savagery were used to frighten children into obedience. It was said he stood 7 feet tall, could tear a man in half with his bare hands, and commanded a horde of monstrous werewolves who drank the blood of their enemies. Ethelgard's armies had been decimated by Rowan's forces. Desperate to prevent the total annihilation of his kingdom, the King of Ethelgard begged for a peace treaty. King Rowan's terms were simple but terrifying. He demanded a tribute to seal the pact, a bride of high noble blood from the ruling families of the north. She was to be sent to his stronghold in the jagged peaks of Vargfjell, never to return. Everyone in the kingdom knew what this meant. It was not a marriage, it was a sacrifice. The Beast King was a monster. He would likely mate with the girl, tear her apart, and feed her bones to his pack. The King of Ethelgard, unwilling to send his own daughter, commanded Lord Cedric Arrington to offer up his pride and joy. He demanded Rosalind. The night the royal decree arrived at Iron Oak Keep, the castle descended into chaos. Lord Cedric raged, hurling goblets against the stone walls. Lady Beatrice collapsed into hysterics, tearing at her hair and screaming that her precious, perfect Rosalind would not be fed to northern dogs. Scarlett watched the chaos from the shadows of the doorway, clutching her veil across her scarred cheek. Suddenly, Lady Beatrice stopped screaming. Her eyes, red and venomous, snapped toward the shadows. She slowly rose from the floor, a dark, wicked smile spreading across her face. "Cedric," Beatrice whispered, pointing a trembling, jeweled finger at Scarlett. "The king's decree said a daughter of House Arrington. It did not specify which daughter." Cedric paused, his chest heaving. He looked at Scarlett. For the first time in years, he truly looked at her. Scarlett felt a cold terror grip her heart. She stepped back, but the guards were already behind her. "Father, no," Scarlet whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, they say the Beast King is a monster. He will kill me." "You are already dead to this family, Scarlet," Cedric said coldly, turning his back on her. "You will finally serve a purpose. You will save your sister, and you will save this kingdom. Prepare her. She leaves for Vargfjell at dawn. They did not dress her like a bride. They dressed her like a corpse meant for the pyre." Lady Beatrice oversaw the preparations with malicious glee. Scarlet was stripped of her plain wool dresses and forced into a gown of stark, freezing white silk. It was a beautiful dress, but utterly inappropriate for the harsh winter of the northern mountains. There were no furs, no heavy cloaks to protect her from the biting wind. It was a final, calculated cruelty. Beatrice wanted her to suffer every second of the journey. Before she was pushed into the open carriage, Beatrice snatched the veil from Scarlet's hands. "No veils," Beatrice hissed, her breath smelling of sour wine. "Let the Beast King see exactly what we think of him. We are sending him our garbage. Let him choke on it." Scarlet was shoved into the carriage. There were no tearful goodbyes, no blessings from the local priests. Her father did not even come down to the courtyard to watch her leave. Only Rosalind stood on the balcony, wrapped in thick mink furs, waving a lazy, mocking hand as the carriage lurched forward. Her escort consisted of 20 heavily armed men led by Captain Alaric, a hardened, bitter soldier who clearly viewed this assignment as a death sentence. The journey to the border of Vargfjell took 2 grueling weeks. The further north they traveled, the colder it became. The lush green forests of Ethelgard gave way to jagged, black rocks and towering pines choked with snow. Scarlet froze in the carriage. Her lips turned blue, and she violently shivered, wrapping her thin arms around herself. The soldiers offered her no blankets. They looked at her with a mixture of pity and disgust, their eyes constantly darting to the gruesome, jagged scar that dominated her face. "Keep your head turned, my lady," Captain Alaric muttered one evening as he tossed a meager piece of hard bread into her carriage. "It unsettles the men. They say you carry the devil's mark. It's bad luck." "I am sorry," Scarlet whispered, shrinking back into the darkest corner of the carriage, letting her hair fall over her ruined cheek. The physical cold was agonizing, but the isolation was worse. She was riding toward her death, and the men meant to protect her treated her like a plague victim. On the 15th day, they reached the Bloodwood, the official border of the Lycan King's territory. The atmosphere changed instantly. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of pine, iron, and something feral. The trees here were massive, their bark as dark as charcoal, their branches twisting together to block out the pale winter sun. The horses began to panic, whinnying and rearing. The soldiers drew their swords, their eyes wide with terror. From the shadows of the tree line, massive shapes began to emerge. They were not normal wolves. They were the size of war horses, their fur thick and matted, their eyes glowing with unnatural intelligence, amber, gold, and piercing crimson. A low, rumbling growl echoed through the forest, a sound so deep it vibrated in Scarlet's chest. Captain Alaric's nerve broke completely. "Drop the tribute!" Alaric screamed, yanking his horse around. "Flee! Back to the keep!" The soldiers did not need to be told twice. They abandoned the carriage, whipping their horses and fleeing back down the mountain pass in absolute terror, leaving Scarlet entirely alone. Scarlet sat frozen in the carriage. Her breath plumed in the freezing air. She looked out at the tree line. A dozen massive, dire wolves stepped out of the shadows. They moved with terrifying, lethal grace. The snow did not crunch beneath their paws. They were silent as ghosts. Scarlet closed her eyes. "This is it," she thought. "This is how I die. They will tear my throat out, and it will finally be over." She didn't even have the energy to cry. She just felt profoundly tired. A massive, slate-gray wolf, standing taller than the rest, approached the carriage. It had a vicious scar across its snout and eyes like molten gold. Scarlet braced herself for the teeth, for the agonizing pain. The wolf stopped at the edge of the carriage. It leaned its massive head in, sniffing her. Scarlet squeezed her eyes shut tighter, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She waited, and waited. Instead of a bite, she felt a sudden warm huff of breath against her icy cheek. She slowly opened her eyes. The great gray wolf was not looking at her with hunger. It was looking at her scar. The beast let out a soft, almost confused whine. Then, to Scarlet's absolute shock, the massive wolf stepped back, lowered its head, and bowed. One by one, the other wolves emerged from the trees. They did not snarl. They did not attack. They formed a protective circle around the broken carriage, sitting in the snow, their heads bowed toward her. Scarlet sat in the freezing white silk, trembling, utterly bewildered. She was the ruined daughter of Ethelgard, the ugly sacrifice. Why were the monsters bowing to her? Before she could process what was happening, the gray wolf approached again, this time gently taking the hem of her ruined white dress in its teeth and tugging lightly. It wanted her to follow, having no other choice, and realizing she would freeze to death if she stayed in the carriage. Scarlet stepped out into the snow. Instantly, two smaller, heavily furred wolves pressed their bodies against her legs, sharing their immense body heat. Escorted by a pack of apex predators, the scarred bride began her final descent into the Beast King's domain. The fortress of Vargfjell was not a crude cave or a barbaric ruin, as the scholars in Ethelgard claimed. It was an architectural marvel carved directly into the heart of a massive black mountain. Immense pillars of obsidian held up ceilings that seemed to touch the sky. Torches roaring with unnatural blue fire lined the great halls, casting flickering shadows across walls adorned with the pelts of monstrous beasts and ancient runic tapestries. Scarlet was led through the sprawling gates by her lupine escort. The courtyard was teeming with lycans. Some were in their massive wolf forms, while others walked as men and women, though even in human form, they were terrifying. They were unnaturally tall, muscled like gladiators, adorned in leathers, furs, and heavy iron jewelry. As Scarlet walked through the courtyard, the noise died down. Hundreds of eyes turned to look at her. She shrank in on herself, instinctively raising a hand to cover the jagged white scar on her face. She knew what they were seeing. They were seeing a frail, broken, ugly human girl in a freezing white dress. They were seeing an insult. "He will kill me for this," she thought, panic rising in her throat. The Beast King asked for a noble bride, and they sent him a scarred freak. He will view this as an act of war. She was led up a massive flight of stone steps and into the great hall. At the far end of the cavernous room, sitting upon a throne forged from the iron swords of fallen enemies and the skulls of great bears, sat Rowan, the Beast King. He was in his human form, but he looked no less lethal than a wolf. Rowan was a mountain of a man, radiating an aura of absolute crushing dominance. His hair was long and the color of midnight, falling over broad, heavily scarred shoulders. He wore thick black leather armor and a cloak of magnificent dark fur, but it was his eyes that stole the breath from Scarlet's lungs. They were striking, piercing silver like two frozen moons. The great gray wolf that had escorted her trotted up to the throne, shifted seamlessly into a tall, imposing man, and knelt before the king. "My king," the man said, his voice a deep rumble. "The tribute from Ethelgard has arrived." Rowan leaned forward, resting his chin on a massive ringed hand. His silver eyes locked onto Scarlet, who stood shivering at the center of the hall, flanked by guards. "Ethelgard tests my patience," Rowan's voice echoed through the hall. It was a terrifying sound, a dark, resonant baritone that sent shivers down the spines of everyone present. "I demanded their finest blood to seal this pact. Let us see what garbage King Aldous has sent me to appease my wrath." Rowan stood up. He stood at least 6'6", moving with the predatory grace of a stalking panther. As he descended the steps of his dais, the entire court held its breath. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of Rowan's heavy boots striking the stone. Scarlet's legs shook so violently she thought she might collapse. She kept her head down, her chin pressed against her chest, her hand clamped desperately over her scar. She just wanted it to be quick. Rowan stopped inches in front of her. The heat radiating off his massive body was intense. He smelled of pine, wood smoke, and rain. "Look at me, human," he commanded softly, yet the order carried an immense weight. Scarlet trembled. She couldn't do it. She couldn't let him see the monster she was. "I said," Rowan repeated, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into a terrifying guttural growl, "Look at me." A massive, calloused hand reached out. His fingers, hot and rough, gently grasped her wrist. With terrifying ease, he pulled her hand away from her face. Then, he placed 2 fingers under her chin and forced her to look up. Scarlet squeezed her eyes shut, turning her face slightly, exposing the full, horrific length of the jagged scar that tore across her cheek and down her neck. She waited for the disgust. She waited for the roar of fury. She waited for him to snap her neck for the insult her father had dealt him. Instead, Rowan froze. The massive Beast King stopped breathing. His hand, previously firm and demanding under her chin, suddenly began to tremble. Slowly, Scarlet opened her eyes. She expected to see rage in Rowan's silver eyes. Instead, she saw something that defied all logic. She saw absolute, unadulterated shock. And beneath the shock, a violent, overwhelming surge of emotion. Rowan didn't see an ugly, ruined girl. He saw the exact shape of the scar. He traced the jagged edges with his silver eyes, recognizing the pattern instantly. It wasn't just a random injury. It was a claw mark. Specifically, it was his claw mark. 14 years ago, Rowan had been a young, rogue prince, ambushed by a pack of feral rogues near the southern border. He had been bleeding out in the snow when a tiny, terrified human girl had stumbled out of a carriage to try and help him. When the feral rogues attacked her, Rowan had thrown himself in front of the beast. In the frantic, bloody scuffle to save the child's life, his own claw had accidentally grazed her face, tearing her flesh. He had killed the rogue, saved the girl, but he had left his mark on her. In Lycan culture, bleeding for another, and leaving a permanent mark in an act of protection, was the deepest, most sacred bond of the soul. He had marked his fated mate without even knowing it, and he had spent 14 years tearing the continent apart, looking for the girl who smelled of winter roses and carried his scar. And now, she was standing in his hall, shivering in a thin white dress, expecting him to kill her. Rowan inhaled deeply, taking in her scent. The smell of winter roses hit his senses like a physical blow, burying itself deep in his chest. His wolf howled in absolute triumph inside his mind. Mate, mine, found. The court watched in stunned, breathless silence as the most terrifying warlord in the history of the realm, a man who had slaughtered armies and brought kings to heel, did the unthinkable. Rowan dropped to his knees. The heavy thud of his knees hitting the stone floor echoed like a thunderclap through the great hall. His generals gasped. The guards stepped back in shock. Scarlet staggered back, her eyes wide with panic. Please, she stammered, entirely misunderstanding the gesture. I know I am ugly. I know it is an insult. Do not torture me, my lord. Just make it quick. Rowan looked up at her, his silver eyes shining with a fierce, possessive reverence. He reached out, his massive hands gently taking her small, trembling, ice-cold hands in his. He brought her knuckles to his lips, pressing a devastatingly tender kiss to her skin. Ugly? Rowan whispered, his voice thick with emotion, a tear of pure relief slipping down his scarred face. My sweet, brave girl, they lied to you. You are the most beautiful creature to ever walk this earth. He turned his head, pressing his lips to the very edge of her scar, right where it met her wrist. You are my fated mate, Rowan declared, his voice rising so every Lycan in the hall could hear his decree. You are the queen of Vargfjell, and before the winter is over, I will burn Ethelgard to ashes for daring to make you cry. The great hall was entirely silent, save for the crackling of the blue flames in the obsidian sconces. Scarlet stared down at the massive, terrifying warlord kneeling at her feet, his lips pressed to her trembling wrist. Her mind simply could not process the scene. For 14 years, she had been a ghost in her own home, a creature to be hidden and despised. Now, the most feared conqueror in the known world was looking at her as if she were a goddess descended from the stars. I do not understand, Scarlet whispered, her voice barely carrying over the drafty hall. You are the Beast King. I am broken. I am the ruined daughter. My own father could not bear to look at me. Rowan's silver eyes flashed with a sudden, violent fury, but he kept his touch feather-light, sensing her terror. He stood up slowly, his towering frame casting a long shadow over her. Your father, Rowan rumbled, the sheer malice in his tone causing the nearby guards to stiffen, is a blind, arrogant fool who will choke on his own blood before this year is out. He threw away the greatest treasure his wretched kingdom ever produced. He gently cupped her face. Scarlet instinctively flinched, trying to pull the scarred side of her cheek away, but Rowan would not let her hide. His thumb brushed over the jagged white ridge of the scar. Do you truly not remember? he asked softly. 14 winters ago, the southern pass near the weeping pines. A blizzard. Scarlett's breath hitched. The memory was a nightmare she had tried to bury. My carriage was attacked, she whispered, her eyes widening. My mother died. There were monsters in the snow. Feral rogues, Rowan corrected gently. Exiles from the packs, driven mad by the cold and hunger. They ambushed you, but they did not act alone. I was there, Scarlett. I was a prince in exile, tracking those very rogues. They ambushed me first. I was bleeding out in the snow, trapped in my wolf form. Scarlett stared at him, the pieces of the puzzle slowly clicking together. Coding remembered a massive shadow in the snow, bleeding black blood. She had been just a child, terrified, but she had taken her small wool blanket and run out of the carriage to throw it over the dying beast. You tried to save me, Rowan said, his voice thick with emotion. A tiny, fragile human child running into the teeth of a blizzard to warm a dying monster. When the rogues circled back to finish me off, they went for you. I threw myself between you and their jaws. In the chaos, my claw caught your cheek. I saved your life, but I marked you. Scarlett lifted a trembling hand to her own face, tracing the scar that had defined her entire existence of misery. You were the wolf? In Lycan law, to bleed for another and leave a permanent mark while defending their life is the ancient right of the fated mate, Rowan explained, his silver eyes blazing with absolute certainty. Our souls were bound the moment my blood mixed with yours in the snow. I have spent a decade and a half searching the continent for the girl who smelled of winter roses and carried my mark. I was prepared to burn Ethelgard to the ground, just to search their ashes for you. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. You are not a ruined thing, Scarlett. You wear the crest of the Beast King. That scar is a crown, and those who mocked it will pay with their lives. Before Scarlett could respond, her sheer exhaustion, combined with the freezing temperature and the overwhelming shock, finally took its toll. Her eyes rolled back, and her legs gave out. She did not hit the stone floor. Rowan caught her instantly, scooping her up into his massive arms as if she weighed no more than a feather. He roared commands in the old Lycan tongue. The hall erupted into motion. Healers rushed forward, bearing thick, heated pelts of dire bear and snow leopard. For 3 days, Scarlett drifted in and out of a feverish sleep in the king's own chambers, a massive room dominated by a roaring hearth and a bed large enough for 3 grown men. When she finally woke, fully lucid, the freezing white silk dress was gone, replaced by soft, woven wool tunics and luxurious furs. The ever-present chill in her bones had vanished. Beside her bed sat an older woman with silver hair and kind amber eyes. She was a Lycan healer named Martha. Drink this, my queen, Martha said gently, pressing a warm cup of spiced broth into Scarlett's hands. I am not a queen, Scarlett murmured, looking down at the heavy gold rings that had been placed on her fingers while she slept. You are to us, Martha smiled, a fierce, wolfish glint in her eyes. Our king has not slept. He has paced the battlements for 3 days, waiting for your fever to break. He has also been preparing the war council. Scarlett sat up, panic gripping her chest. War? But the treaty. The treaty was built on an insult. A deep voice boomed from the doorway. Rowan stepped into the room. He was fully armored in dark steel, a massive broadsword strapped to his back. He looked every bit the warlord history claimed him to be. Yet, as he approached the bed, his expression softened entirely. He sat on the edge of the mattress, his weight dipping the heavy furs. Lord Richard of House Montgomery has arrived at our borders. Rowan spat the name as if it were poison. Lord Richard was Ethelgard's chief diplomat, a close confidant of Scarlett's cruel father, Lord Cedric. He brings a message from King Aldous and your father. They demand to know if the beast has consumed his meal and if the borders are now secure. They actually sent a man to verify that you were dead, Scarlett. Scarlett felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Lord Richard had always been one of her chief tormentors, a man who regularly joked with Lady Beatrice that Scarlett should be locked in a crypt to spare the castle the sight of her. They think you tore me apart, Scarlett whispered. They hoped I did, Rowan corrected, his jaw clenching. Lord Richard waits in the courtyard. I intend to go down there, rip his spine through his throat, and send his head back to your father in a wooden box. Then, my armies march south. Scarlett looked at Rowan. For the first time in her life, The crushing weight of her victimhood began to lift. For 14 years, she had been silent. She had let them define her, let them break her spirit and hide her away in the dark. Now, she was sitting in the stronghold of the most powerful army in the world, and the Beast King was asking for her blessing to destroy her abusers. But as she looked at Rowan's furious silver eyes, a different kind of strength sparked within her, a cold, sharp clarity. "No," Scarlet said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not shake. Rowan paused, looking at her in surprise. "No?" Scarlet pushed the heavy furs aside and stood up. She was small compared to him, but she stood perfectly straight. "If you kill him and march your armies, you validate everything they say about you," Scarlet said, looking directly into Rowan's eyes. "They will call you a mindless monster who breaks treaties. They will unite the southern kingdoms against you. My father will play the grieving victim who sacrificed his daughter for nothing." She walked over to a polished bronze mirror resting on a vanity. She looked at her reflection. The white, jagged scar was still there, angry and stark against her pale skin. But for the first time, she didn't see an ugly deformity. She saw the mark of a survivor. She saw the crest of a king. Scarlet turned back to Rowan, her chin raised. "Do not kill Lord Richard. Bring him to the Great Hall. Let him see exactly what my father's garbage has become. And then, Rowan, we will not march south to start a war. We will ride south to enforce the treaty." Rowan slowly stood up, a massive, predatory grin spreading across his face. The sheer pride radiating from his aura was intoxicating. "As my queen commands." He bowed his head. Lord Richard of House Montgomery stood in the center of the Great Hall, looking deeply uncomfortable. He was flanked by 10 Ethelgard guards, all of whom were sweating profusely despite the cold, their eyes darting nervously toward the massive lichen warriors lining the walls. Richard smoothed his velvet doublet, clearing his throat loudly. "I demand an audience with King Rowan," Richard announced, trying to sound authoritative, though his voice cracked slightly. "I am here on behalf of Lord Cedric Arrington to confirm the fulfillment of the Blood Pact." The massive obsidian doors at the head of the hall swung open with a deafening groan. Rowan strode out, his presence suffocating the room. But he did not take the throne. Instead, he stood beside it, extending his hand toward the shadows of the corridor. From the darkness stepped Scarlet. She did not wear the freezing white silk of a sacrifice. She was dressed in the magnificent garments of the Lichen Queen. A gown of deep, midnight blue velvet swept the floor, trimmed in thick silver wolf fur. A heavy cloak of dark leather, embroidered with the ancient runes of the Vargfjell, fell from her shoulders. Her dark hair was braided back, exposing the entirety of her scarred face with absolute, unapologetic pride. Resting upon her brow was a crown forged of black iron and moonstones. Lord Richard's face drained of all color. His jaw literally dropped. The Ethelgard guards gasped, taking involuntary steps back. "Lady? Lady Scarlet?" Richard choked out, his eyes bulging as if he were looking at a ghost. But the sacrifice, the pact. Scarlet walked down the steps, her head held high. Rowan walked a half step behind her, a silent, terrifying shadow of lethal protection. The pact was a bride of high noble blood. "Lord Richard," Scarlet said, her voice ringing out clear and steady across the hall. "My father delivered on his promise. I am the bride." "This is a trick," Richard stammered, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You are an outcast, a scarred wretch. The Beast King would never." A terrifying, guttural snarl ripped through the hall. Before Richard could even blink, Rowan had crossed the distance. The Lichen King didn't draw his sword. He simply grabbed Lord Richard by the throat and hoisted the grown man 3 feet into the air. Richard kicked and gagged, his face turning purple. "You will speak to the Queen of Vargfjell with your head bowed, human," Rowan hissed, his eyes flashing wolf gold. "Or I will tear your tongue from your skull and make you swallow it." "Rowan, drop him." Scarlet's voice was calm, but it carried the absolute authority of a sovereign. Miraculously, the Beast King immediately complied, tossing the chief diplomat to the floor like a sack of grain. Richard gasped for air, scrambling backward on his hands and knees. "Deliver a message to King Aldous and my father," Scarlet commanded, looking down at the pathetic, gasping man. "Tell them the treaty is accepted. The peace is sealed." And tell Lord Cedric Arrington that the Beast King and his queen will be visiting Iron Keep at the end of the month to personally collect my dowry." 2 weeks later, the northern winds carried a terrifying procession to the gates of Iron Keep. Lord Cedric, Lady Beatrice, and Rosalind stood on the battlements, shivering in their furs. They had received Lord Richard's frantic, unbelievable raven, but Cedric had refused to believe it. He assumed it was a lichen trick. He assumed the northern monsters were coming to slaughter them all. When the massive oak gates of the keep were pushed open, the courtyard filled with hundreds of armored lichen warriors. At the center of the formation rode 2 massive destriers. On the black horse sat Rowan, looking like a god of war, and beside him, on a pure white mare, sat Scarlet. The courtyard was dead silent. The castle staff, the guards, and the nobility stared in absolute shock. The broken, scarred girl they had abused, mocked, and sent to her death had returned as the most powerful woman on the continent. Lord Cedric hurried down the stone steps, his face pale, dragging Beatrice and Rosalind behind him. For the first time in his life, the arrogant Duke of Ethelgard dropped to his knees in the dirt. Beatrice and Rosalind quickly followed, shaking with terror. "Your Majesties," Cedric stammered, keeping his eyes glued to the mud. Scarlet did not dismount. She looked down at the father who had discarded her, the stepmother who had tortured her, and the sister who had mocked her scars. She felt no anger anymore, only pity. "Stand up, Lord Cedric," Scarlet said coldly. Cedric slowly rose, unable to meet her eyes. Beatrice was weeping silently, terrified of the massive Lichen King glaring daggers at her. Rosalind looked at Scarlet's magnificent velvet gown and iron crown with a mixture of terror and sickening envy. "You sent me to the maw to be eaten, father," Scarlet said, her voice echoing off the stone walls of the courtyard she used to scrub on her hands and knees. "You thought you were discarding your trash. Instead, you gave me a kingdom." "Scarlet, please," Cedric begged, his voice cracking. "I did it to save the realm. I am your father." "You are nothing to me," Scarlet interrupted, her tone like absolute ice. "I am here to collect what is owed to Vargfjell. As the queen, I demand the tribute of House Arrington. You will surrender all control of the northern marches to the Lichen Crown. You will forfeit the Iron Keep. You, Lady Beatrice and Rosalind, are stripped of your noble titles. You will be banished to the southern fringes of the kingdom, to live as commoners in the dirt you so clearly belong in." Beatrice let out a piercing shriek. "No, you cannot do this. You ugly, scarred little freak, you cannot take my home." Faster than the eye could follow, a massive gray dire wolf the size of a carriage materialized from the ranks and pinned Beatrice to the ground, its jaws inches from her throat. It was Rowan's general. Beatrice froze, whimpering in sheer terror. Rowan leaned forward in his saddle, his silver eyes locking onto Cedric. "Be thankful my mate is merciful, Cedric. Had she allowed me my way, your heads would be decorating the pikes of my gates. You have 1 hour to pack whatever you can carry on your backs. Then, you walk." Cedric collapsed back onto his knees, sobbing into his hands. Rosalind wailed, clutching her expensive furs. Scarlet watched them for a moment longer. The ghost of the broken girl in the eastern tower finally vanished, replaced entirely by the sovereign of the north. She turned her horse away from her former family, looking at her husband. Rowan was watching her with a mixture of profound awe and burning adoration. He reached out across the space between their horses, gently taking her hand. He didn't care about the Ethelgard guards or the crying nobles. He pulled her hand to his lips and kissed the white, jagged scar on her wrist. "My beautiful queen," Rowan murmured. Scarlet smiled, a true, radiant smile that made her face glow with an undeniable, breathtaking beauty. She squeezed his hand, riding out of the courtyard to take her rightful place at the top of the world. And so, the shattered girl became the unbreakable queen, proving that true beauty is never found in the mirror, but in the fierce, protective love of a soul that sees you for exactly who you are. The scars of our past do not define our ruin. They are the crowns of our survival. If this story of vengeance, destiny, and untamed love made your heart race, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the video for more epic tales.